In 1978, the residents of the capital city of Athens faced a horrific threat from the sky. A giant aircraft carrying over 400 passengers glided over the city rooftops with a deafening roar. Alarm sirens sounded throughout the city, which could turn into a sea of fire in just a few seconds. In that tense moment, the captain made daring decisions, going against all the operating rules of a Boeing. The Boeing was still flying at high speed, and the aircraft was rapidly descending, second by second. Would death claim them when, right before their eyes, Mount Agaleo, over 470 m high, loomed, while the plane was only flying at 60 m? What would be the outcome for the aircraft? Right now, join us as we delve into Olympic Airways Flight 411. On August 9, 1978, at Ellinikon International Airport, Athens, Greece, it was a sweltering afternoon in Athens, one of the oldest cities in the world. Olympic Airways Flight 411, a transatlantic flight bound for John F. Kennedy International Airport in the United States. It was being refueled, preparing for a journey lasting over 11 hours, with a total flight distance of 7,952 kilometers. The aircraft used for the flight was a Boeing 747-200. The plane carried 400 passengers and 18 crew members. The captain of the flight was Sifis Magatis, 55 years old. He was a former Greek Air Force pilot who participated in World War II from the age of 17 to fight against the German occupation forces, and he had 32 years of experience with Olympic Airlines. Alongside him was First Officer Konstantinos Fakardos, an experienced pilot, a close friend, and a well-coordinated partner of the captain. In addition, a flight engineer was also present on the flight. The 400 passengers were mostly American citizens returning from a summer vacation in Greece. 1 hour and 50 minutes after being fully loaded with 160 tons of fuel, Flight 411 received clearance for departure, and the 4 engines were successively started. At that time, the 747-200 was considered the aircraft with the most powerful engines and the highest maximum takeoff weight in the world, with its 4 Pratt & Whitney JT9D jet engines. Under normal conditions, these engines would generate approximately 46,150 pounds of thrust to lift the heavily loaded aircraft. However, due to recent maintenance on engine number 2, the aircraft's power output was only at 96%. We need to understand more about the limitations of jet engines, the core temperature. If too much fuel is injected into the combustion chamber, the core temperature will rise to a level that damages the internal components behind the combustion chamber and causes a fire or explosion. Therefore, to achieve maximum power output, the crew needs to use a water injection system. This system sprays a mixture of water and glycol into the diffuser just before the combustion chamber, which cools the flame, allows for more fuel to be added for combustion, and increases engine thrust up to 110%, especially at low altitudes and during takeoff. The aircraft taxied to runway 33R. During this time, the flight engineer activated the engine water injection system. At 2 p.m., the aircraft received takeoff clearance from Ellinikon. The captain requested the flight engineer to activate the water injection system, an action that had already been performed. However, the flight engineer forgot that he had already activated it and pressed the button again. This action switched the water injection system to the off position. The enormous amount of fuel continuously being fed into the engines for takeoff, combined with an outside temperature of 32 degrees Celsius, caused engine number 3 to overheat and catch fire. A loud explosion was heard, startling the crew. At this moment, the aircraft had passed the decision speed V1 and was nearing VR, so takeoff could not be aborted. Pieces from engine number 3, following the explosion, were ejected and fell onto the runway and some structures below. Having lost a portion of their thrust, the 2 pilots struggled to lift the aircraft into the air. The aircraft cleared the 3.6 m high airport fence at a close distance, then proceeded towards the city center. At this moment, the captain made a dangerous decision, contrary to aviation safety regulations. Retracting the landing gear at low altitude and low speed would take approximately 15 seconds for the gear bay doors to open and close. This would increase drag on the aircraft, and in a worst-case scenario, the aircraft could crash. Using his experience, the captain instructed the first officer to retract the landing gear to reduce drag on the aircraft. The aircraft was temporarily stabilized in the air. But a second problem also began to appear. The water injection system and the entire alcohol additive pumping system also stopped working. Engine number 2, which had just undergone maintenance, had lost a portion of its thrust. The aircraft became increasingly difficult to maneuver. The aircraft was now very close to Pawnee Hill. Pawnee is a hill 200 feet high, equivalent to 60.96 meters. It was equal to, or even higher than, the aircraft's current altitude. At this moment, the crew could not fly around the hill. The maximum bank angle the aircraft could achieve was only 2 degrees. The only option was to fly straight ahead. From the airport, air traffic control personnel watched the aircraft with bated breath. It was almost heading straight into the hill. everything would end in the worst possible way. However, danger still remained. The two engines, which were already straining to carry the 350-ton aircraft, were beginning to weaken. Having cleared the hill, the aircraft was now heading towards the city center, with over 3 million residents. The first officer sent out emergency signals to the control tower.
ATC, this is Olympic 411. We have lost one engine and are encountering problems in some of the others.
For 1-1, can you return to the airport?
The aircraft is unable to divert. We are trying to get out of the city.
The pilot's original plan was to crash into a stadium that was empty, but they then changed their objective to Mount Agaleo, a mountain with no residents. If the aircraft had crashed in the city center, 411 would have become the most horrific disaster of all time. 160 tons of fuel would have ignited and incinerated everything. Nearly a minute passed, and its speed had decreased to 263 kilometers per hour, below the minimum limit of 290 kilometers per hour for the aircraft to maintain flight. In the cockpit, the atmosphere was eerily silent. The captain and first officer were concentrating fully on their tasks, while the flight engineer was attempting to restart the engines. The captain gently lowered the aircraft's nose. Its altitude had now reached a minimum of 47.85 meters. The aircraft skimmed over apartment buildings. Even several transmission towers were knocked down by the aircraft. Residents were witnessing the massive machine flying directly overhead. In this dangerous situation, the flight attendants remained extremely calm, as if nothing had happened. They put on a wonderful act to prevent the passengers from feeling anxious. Passengers sitting near the windows by engine number 3 seemed to have a premonition of something terrible about to happen. Thick black smoke was billowing, and the aircraft was flying unusually low. The question arises, why didn't the aircraft crash, despite descending to its minimum altitude? This was due to a ground effect, an aerodynamic phenomenon that occurs when an aircraft is very close to the ground. If the distance from the aircraft to the ground is equal to 1/2 of its wingspan, the airflow will be distorted due to interaction with the ground. This effect creates additional lift, helping the aircraft maintain altitude at low speeds. The captain continued to lower the aircraft's nose, and fortunately, this time it worked. A second piece of good news also arrived. The flight engineers successfully improved some of the aircraft's performance by intervening with the control panel. The aircraft's speed now exceeded 273 kilometers per hour. The captain utilized the regained thrust to lift the aircraft as high as possible. They would head out to sea to dump fuel and return to their point of origin. But to do this, they needed to overcome the obstacle ahead. Currently, the aircraft's altitude was only 90 meters, too low to fly over the 400-meter high mountain, and turning to fly around it was almost hopeless. At precisely 2:05 p.m., a gentle gust of wind provided the aircraft with significant lift and allowed it to reach a higher altitude. The captain successfully took advantage of it and slowly steered the aircraft to fly around the dangerous mountainside, successfully clearing the mountain. At this time, the aircraft had completely lost contact with ATC. The captain continued to pilot the aircraft out to sea and dump fuel for 30 minutes, releasing 130 tons of fuel. The aircraft was significantly lighter, and its speed and altitude improved. The crew piloted it back to its point of origin. The entire period of danger for the aircraft lasted 93 seconds. When the aircraft returned to the airport, everyone erupted in joy, unable to believe their eyes. A true miracle had occurred. The aircraft landed safely. The captain successfully saved 418 lives. In fact, all the passengers were unaware that they had just returned from the brink of disaster. The captain and first officer then boarded a replacement B-747 aircraft to continue their journey across the Atlantic to the United States. It wasn't until 2004 that the Hellenic Air Accident Investigation and Aviation Safety Board was established. Boeing issued its final conclusion. There were no technical malfunctions in the aircraft or engines that caused the performance issues. Instead, the incident occurred because the crew inadvertently switched off the water injection pumps, causing engine number 3 to catch fire and explode. The captain's successful landing was beyond the imagination of the aircraft manufacturer. Boeing's flight simulations, with the most thorough preparation and the best experts, all resulted in a crash in a similar situation. The captain's miracle was due to his intelligence, composure, and the experience he had accumulated over decades of flying aircraft. The lack of any movement from the passengers was also a factor that helped the aircraft maintain its optimal condition. To this day, Captain Megadis is still remembered and recounted by the people of Greece to their children and grandchildren as a great hero.